August 6, 1945, a few minutes before 8:15 in the morning, Hiroshima, Japan. Doctor Terufumi Sasaki, 25 years old, is walking down a corridor on the second floor of the Red Cross Hospital, carrying a blood specimen in his left hand. He is a young surgeon at the largest hospital in the city. He has not slept well. He is thinking about a patient whose test results he expects to read within the hour. 1,350 yards to the southeast, a woman named Hatsuyo Nakamura is standing at her kitchen window watching her neighbor tear down his house. The city has ordered civilians to demolish buildings and clear fire lanes between structures in case the American bombers come with incendiaries, the way they came to Tokyo 5 months earlier. Her 3 children, Toshio, Yaeko, and Mieko, are somewhere behind her in the small wooden house. Her husband was killed at Singapore in 1942. She has been raising them alone ever since. 1,400 yards to the south, a German Jesuit priest named Father Wilhelm Kleinsorge is lying on the top floor of a mission house, reading a copy of the magazine Stimmen der Zeit. He is 38. He has been in Japan for years. The August heat is already heavy before 9 in the morning. 3,500 yards to the west, in the suburb of Koi, Reverend Kiyoshi Tanimoto has stopped at the door of a private house. Tanimoto is the pastor of the Hiroshima Methodist Church. He studied at Emory University in Atlanta. He speaks fluent English. He has spent the early morning helping a friend move belongings out of the city center, away from what everyone assumes will eventually be firebombing. He is standing in a doorway, pausing for breath, looking east toward downtown. 1,550 yards from the city center, Dr. Masakazu Fuji is sitting on the porch of his private clinic, a small wooden building that juts out over one of the city's rivers on stilts. He is reading the morning newspaper. The clinic is his livelihood and his home. In a few minutes, the building will collapse into the river and pin him between 2 beams in the water, with a broken collarbone and deep cuts across his face. 1,600 yards to the south, a 20-year-old clerk named Toshiko Sasaki has just sat down at her desk at the East Asia Tin Works. She is placing a document next to a bookcase on her left side. She does not know anyone named Dr. Sasaki. They will share a surname in the historical record, but they have never met. Across the city, streetcars are running. It is a Monday. The morning commute is at its peak. Thousands of middle school students, some as young as 12, are outdoors in the open air, working in organized teams to demolish buildings and clear fire breaks. They have been mobilized by city authorities for this work because everyone expects the Americans will eventually bring the incendiary raids that have already burned 66 other Japanese cities that summer. The lanes are meant to stop the fire from jumping between neighborhoods when it comes. The sky is clear, the weather is warm. An air raid alert had sounded earlier that morning when a single American B-29 was spotted overhead. These high-altitude reconnaissance flights happen almost every day. The plane was gone by 7:31, and the all-clear siren sounded. The city relaxed. People went back to their commutes. Radio Hiroshima is beginning a broadcast. In the harbor, ferries are crossing the 7 channels of the Ota River Delta that divide the city into its islands and peninsulas. Near Hiroshima Castle, which serves as headquarters for the 2nd General Army, soldiers are doing their morning calisthenics in the open courtyard. The city's population that morning is somewhere between 250,000 and 300,000 civilians, plus a military garrison of roughly 20 to 40,000 troops. Hiroshima, in the summer of 1945, is a city that knows it is living on borrowed time. Every major city around it has been bombed. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, Yokohama, all of them firebombed. Tokyo itself was burned almost to the ground in March. Hiroshima alone has been left untouched, and no one knows why. Some residents believe the city is being spared because so many Japanese Americans originally came from the Hiroshima prefecture. Others think the Americans are simply saving it for later. A few suspect something worse, though no one can say what that might mean. The city has dug shelters, organized fire brigades, and mobilized its children to tear down buildings. It has done everything it can think of to prepare for the blow it believes is coming. It has prepared for the wrong blow. No one in the city understands what happens next. There is no sound first. there is light. A light that survivors will spend the rest of their lives trying to describe, and never quite succeeding. It is not like the sun. It is not like fire. It is a whiteness that seems to come from inside everything at once, from the walls, from the air, from the skin of your own hands. Then comes the heat, then the blast, and then the world that existed 3 seconds earlier ceases to exist. Every person I just named is real. Every one of them survived the next 4 seconds, and every one of them spent the rest of their life carrying the weight of what happened in those seconds, because the city that was catching its morning streetcars had just become the first place on Earth where a single weapon ended an entire city. This is not a story about a bomb. It is a story about a morning, about the decisions that led to it, the people who bore it, and the 80 years of silence, argument, grief, and unanswered questions that have grown out of it. And to understand how that morning became possible, how a single aircraft carrying a single weapon could do what entire bomber fleets had needed thousands of sorties to accomplish, we have to go back not to the war, not to Pearl Harbor, not even to the rise of Japan as a military power. We have to go back to a chemistry laboratory in Berlin, 7 years before the bomb fell, and where a man who would later say he wished all uranium could be sunk to the bottom of the ocean accidentally opened the door to the deadliest discovery in human history. Here is the sentence that should stop you. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was born in Nazi Germany. Its foundational science was German. The fear that made it necessary was a German fear. The men who built it were, many of them, refugees who had fled Germany and the countries Germany conquered. And the weapon was never used against Germany. It was dropped on a city that had no nuclear program, no atomic research of military significance, and no warning of what was about to happen. The weapon that was designed to stop Adolf Hitler was used to end a war with a country that had never heard of uranium fission. That contradiction is the spine of everything that follows. December 1938, Berlin. A chemist named Otto Hahn and his assistant Fritz Strassmann are working at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Chemistry. They are conducting experiments with uranium, bombarding uranium atoms with neutrons, and they are finding something in the debris that neither of them can explain. They are finding barium. Barium has roughly half the atomic weight of uranium. Something is splitting the uranium atom in two. Hahn writes to his former colleague Lise Meitner, a physicist of Austrian Jewish descent, who has already fled Nazi Germany for Sweden. Over Christmas, Meitner and her nephew Otto Frisch work out the physics. They call the process fission. When a uranium atom splits, it releases energy, an enormous amount of energy, and it releases additional neutrons. Those neutrons can split more uranium atoms, which release more energy and more neutrons, in a chain reaction that, if it runs fast enough in a concentrated enough mass of the right material, will produce an explosion unlike anything the world has ever seen. The paper is published in January 1939. Within weeks, physicists on 3 continents understand the implications. Among them is a Hungarian émigré named Leo Szilard, living in New York, who had actually conceived of a nuclear chain reaction years earlier and patented the idea in 1934. Szilard immediately grasps what a military application would mean. If Germany has discovered fission, and it has, and if a chain reaction can be made to work, and the physics says it can, then Adolf Hitler may be in a position to build a weapon capable of destroying an entire city in a single detonation. Szilard goes to see Albert Einstein, the most famous scientist alive, also a German Jewish refugee, living on Long Island. Together, in August 1939, they draft a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt. The letter warns that recent work in nuclear physics makes it probable that uranium could be turned into a new and extremely powerful type of bomb. It warns that Germany has stopped the sale of uranium from the mines it controls in newly occupied Czechoslovakia. It warns that a program may already be underway. Roosevelt reads the letter. He creates an advisory committee. The committee moves slowly. The physics is clear, but the engineering is almost beyond imagination. To build a uranium bomb, you need to separate the rare isotope uranium-235 from the far more common uranium-238. The two are chemically identical. They differ in atomic weight by barely 1%. Separating them in weapons-grade quantities would require industrial processes that do not yet exist, built at a scale no one has ever attempted, at a cost no one can estimate. Alternatively, you need to create an entirely new element, plutonium, in nuclear reactors that have not yet been invented, and then design a completely different type of bomb to make it detonate. The Americans decide to do both. In the summer of 1942, the United States Army takes over the project under the command of Brigadier General Leslie Groves, a blunt and relentless engineer who has just finished overseeing the construction of the Pentagon. Groves selects a theoretical physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer to lead the scientific effort. Oppenheimer is thin, chain-smoking, brilliant, and by temperament the least military man in any room he enters. He reads Sanskrit poetry for pleasure. Groves trusts him anyway. The project is given a deliberately bland cover name, the Manhattan Engineer District. History will remember it as the Manhattan Project. What follows over the next 3 years is the largest secret industrial undertaking in human history. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, an entire secret city of 75,000 workers is built in the hills of the Cumberland Plateau. Its purpose is to separate uranium-235 using electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion, and thermal diffusion, methods so new that the engineers are designing the machines while building them. The electromagnetic separation plant alone, called Y-12, contains nearly 15,000 tons of silver borrowed from the United States Treasury because copper, the normal material for electrical windings, is in wartime shortage. The scale is staggering. The entire output of the Oak Ridge complex, running for nearly 3 years, will produce barely enough weapons-grade uranium for a single bomb. The workers at Oak Ridge are told almost nothing about what they are producing. They know only that the material they handle is important and dangerous. At Hanford, Washington, on a stretch of desert along the Columbia River, the first large-scale nuclear reactors are built to produce plutonium. Before 1942, plutonium existed only in microscopic quantities in a laboratory at the University of California, Berkeley. Now it is being manufactured by the kilogram in reactors that no one has ever operated before, cooled by river water pumped at enormous volume, tended by workers who understand radiation only as a new and invisible hazard they have been told to respect. At Los Alamos, New Mexico, on a remote mesa in the Jemez Mountains, Oppenheimer assembles a team of physicists, chemists, metallurgists, and engineers who represent the greatest concentration of scientific talent ever gathered in one place. Their job is to design 2 different types of atomic bomb. One, a uranium gun-type weapon, works by firing one piece of uranium into another to create a critical mass. The design is so mechanically straightforward that the scientists are confident it will work without a full-scale test. The second, a plutonium implosion device, requires a perfectly symmetrical detonation of shaped explosive charges to compress a sphere of plutonium to critical density. It is fiendishly complex. It must be tested. At its peak, the Manhattan Project employs roughly 125,000 people across more than 30 sites in the United States, Canada, and Britain. It costs approximately $2 billion in 1945 money. The secret is so closely held that Vice President Harry Truman does not learn the full scope of the project until days after he becomes president, following Roosevelt's death on April 12, 1945. Workers at Oak Ridge wear badges color-coded by their security clearance. They live in prefabricated dormitories and eat in cafeterias that serve thousands. They operate machines whose function they do not understand, handling material whose name they are not told. A billboard at the Oak Ridge facility reads, "What you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here." The workers follow the instruction. Most of them will not learn what they helped build until they hear the news of Hiroshima on the radio. July 16, 1945, 5:29 in the morning, the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico, roughly 120 miles south of Albuquerque. The device they are testing is called the Gadget. It sits on top of a 100-foot steel tower in the pre-dawn darkness. The men who built it are lying face down in bunkers and observation posts 10 miles away, Some of them are not entirely certain the explosion will not ignite the atmosphere. It detonates with a force equivalent to roughly 21,000 tons of TNT. The flash is visible from 160 miles away. The steel tower is vaporized. The desert sand beneath it fuses into a pale green glassy substance that will later be called trinitite. The mushroom cloud rises to over 40,000 feet. Oppenheimer, watching from a shelter, later recalls that a line from Hindu scripture came to his mind. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He said this in a filmed interview 20 years after the event. Whether he spoke it aloud at the moment of the test, no one present has independently confirmed. What is confirmed is the reaction of Kenneth Bainbridge, the physicist who directed the test. Bainbridge turned to Oppenheimer and said plainly, "Now we are all sons of bitches." The Trinity test proves the plutonium implosion design works. It also proves something else. It proves that human beings have built a device capable of releasing the energy of the atomic nucleus in a single uncontrolled detonation. A threshold has been crossed. There is no way to uncross it. In the hours after the test, as the desert cools and the cloud disperses, some of the scientists celebrate, others are quiet. Several will later say they felt a weight settle on them that morning that never fully lifted. The physicist Isidore Rabi, watching from 20 miles away, later described the flash in words that still carry the weight of that morning. "It blasted," he said. "It pounced. It bored its way right through you. These men have spent 3 years trying to make this work. Now that it works, some of them are not sure it should." Every like on this video is a small thing, but it honors the memory of the ordinary people who were caught in the consequences of what that threshold meant. It costs nothing, and it keeps their story visible. That matters more than I can say. 16 days later, on July 26, 1945, the United States, Great Britain, and China issue the Potsdam Declaration. It demands the unconditional surrender of Japan's armed forces. It warns of prompt and utter destruction. It does not mention the atomic bomb. Japan, in the summer of 1945, is, by every material measure, a defeated nation. Its navy is destroyed. Its merchant fleet is gone. Its air force is reduced to suicide attacks. American submarines have cut the supply lines to the home islands. The firebombing campaign has burned dozens of Japanese cities. The single worst raid, against Tokyo, on the night of March 9th and 10th, 1945, killed at least 80,000 people and left more than 1 million homeless. The country is blockaded. Food production is collapsing. The military situation is hopeless by any rational analysis. But Japan has not surrendered. The Supreme War Council, 6 men who effectively control the nation's war policy, are split down the middle. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, and Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki believe the war must end. War Minister Korechika Anami, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, and Navy Chief of Staff Soemu Toyoda believe Japan must fight on, either to the end or long enough to win terms less crushing than unconditional surrender. Decisions of the Council require unanimity. There is no unanimity. On July 28th, Prime Minister Suzuki publicly responds to the Potsdam Declaration using a Japanese word that will become one of the most debated translations of the 20th century. The word is mokusatsu. It can mean to withhold comment. It can also mean to treat with silent contempt. Suzuki's full statement makes clear that Japan intends to continue fighting. The Allies take the response as a flat rejection. The alternative to the bomb, in the minds of American military planners, is Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, is scheduled for November 1st, 1945. Operation Coronet, the assault on the Kanto Plain and Tokyo, is planned for the spring of 1946. Casualty estimates vary enormously. A June 1945 study by the Joint War Plans Committee projected between 132,000 and 220,000 American casualties for the full campaign. A separate analysis, prepared for Secretary of War Henry Stimson, estimated far higher figures. 500,000 Purple Heart medals were manufactured in anticipation of the invasion. They are still being issued from that original stockpile today. But the decision is not unanimous even within the American government. In June 1945, a group of Manhattan Project scientists led by Nobel laureate James Franck produces a report arguing against a surprise atomic attack on a Japanese city. The Franck report recommends a demonstration of the weapon in an uninhabited area, a chance for the Japanese to see what it can do before it is used against human beings. It warns that dropping the bomb on a city will damage America's moral standing and trigger a post-war nuclear arms race that will make the world more dangerous, not less. Separately, Leo Szilard, the same physicist who had persuaded Einstein to write the letter that started the entire project 6 years earlier, drafts a petition signed by roughly 70 Manhattan Project scientists. It urges President Truman not to use the bomb on Japan without first making surrender terms explicit and giving the Japanese a chance to accept. The petition is routed through official military channels. It almost certainly never reaches Truman before the bombs are dropped. It is not declassified until 1961. The scientific panel of the Interim Committee, the civilian advisory body Secretary Stimson has created to guide atomic policy, consists of 4 of the most eminent scientists in the country: Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, Ernest Lawrence, and Arthur Compton. They are asked whether they can recommend an alternative to direct military use. They conclude, on June 16, 1945, that they can see no acceptable alternative. Stimson himself has drawn one line. He has personally and repeatedly removed the city of Kyoto, Japan's ancient imperial capital, from the target list, over the objections of General Groves. Stimson knows Kyoto's cultural and religious significance. Truman agrees with the removal. Nagasaki is added to the list of potential targets to replace it. The Target Committee, chaired by Groves, has established its criteria. The target must be a large urban area more than 3 miles in diameter. It must have military significance. It must not have been previously bombed by conventional raids so that the specific effects of the atomic weapon can be accurately assessed. And it must be likely to produce maximum psychological impact on the Japanese government. Hiroshima, headquarters of the Second General Army, a major port and embarkation point, and a city that has been deliberately left untouched by the conventional bombing campaign, fits every criterion. Truman writes in his diary on July 25, 1945, "We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world." He writes that he has told Stimson to use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target, and not women and children. But the target has already been selected by the committee, and the target is the center of a city. The disconnect between what the president tells himself in private and what the targeting process has already decided is one of the most uncomfortable silences in the documentary record. The military order authorizing the use of atomic bombs after about August 3rd is signed on July 25th by General Thomas Handy, acting for General George Marshall. It does not require Truman's signature. The machinery is moving. The president believes he is directing it. The record suggests the machinery is directing itself. On the island of Tinian, in the Mariana Islands, 1,500 miles south of Japan, a specially modified B-29, named the Enola Gay, sits on the tarmac at North Field. Its pilot and aircraft commander is Colonel Paul Tibbets, 30 years old, from Quincy, Illinois. He has named the plane after his mother. He commands the 509th Composite Group, a unit created for a single mission and trained in a single maneuver, the sharp, diving, 155-degree turn that the aircraft must execute immediately after bomb release in order to put enough distance between itself and the blast to survive. August 6, 1945, 2:45 in the morning, Tinian time. The Enola Gay lifts off the runway under floodlights, heavy with fuel, and the single weapon in its bomb bay. The crew numbers 12. Tibbets, co-pilot Captain Robert Lewis. Bombardier Major Thomas Ferraby, 26, from North Carolina. Navigator Captain Theodore Van Kirk. Navy Captain William Parsons. The weaponeer and senior ordnance specialist from Los Alamos. Second Lieutenant Morris Jepson, Parsons' assistant. Staff Sergeant Wyatt Dusenbury, flight engineer. Sergeant Joseph Stiborik, radar operator. Staff Sergeant George Caron, tail gunner. Sergeant Robert Schumard, assistant flight engineer. Private First Class Richard Nelson, radio operator, and First Lieutenant Jacob Bezer, radar countermeasures officer, the only man who will fly on both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki strike aircraft. The flight from Tinian to Japan takes approximately 6 hours. For most of that time, the crew sits in the aluminum tube of the B-29 above an empty Pacific. The men know what they are carrying. Tibbets briefed them before takeoff. Some talk, some try to sleep, some stare out at the darkness below. None of them have ever seen a nuclear detonation. None of them are certain what it will look like from 6 miles above. They know the theory. They know the yield estimate. They have rehearsed the escape maneuver dozens of times. But there is a difference between a number on a briefing sheet and a city on fire, and that difference is about to become the most vivid thing any of them will ever experience. The weapon in the bomb bay is called Little Boy. It is a gun-type fission bomb using highly enriched uranium-235. It is roughly 10 feet long, 28 inches in diameter, and weighs approximately 9,700 pounds. It contains about 64 kilograms of uranium, the accumulated output of the vast Oak Ridge separation complex. Its design is simple in principle. A conventional explosive charge fires a hollow uranium projectile down a gun barrel into a uranium target cylinder. When the two pieces come together, they form a supercritical mass. A chain reaction begins. Less than 2% of the uranium will actually undergo fission. It will be enough to produce an explosion equivalent to roughly 15,000 tons of TNT. The core components of Little Boy, the uranium projectile and target assembly, had been delivered to Tinian by the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis. Days after completing the delivery, on its return voyage, the Indianapolis was torpedoed by the Japanese submarine I-58 and sank. Of roughly 1,200 men aboard, approximately 900 made it into the water. Only 316 were rescued after about 4 days adrift in shark-filled seas. The ship that carried the heart of the first atomic bomb suffered one of the worst maritime disasters in United States Navy history on its way home. After takeoff, Navy Captain Parsons climbs into the bomb bay to arm the weapon. He inserts the cordite charges and the detonator into Little Boy while the aircraft is in flight. This is done because the bomb was not fully armed on the ground. If the overloaded B-29 had crashed on takeoff with a fully armed nuclear weapon aboard, it could have detonated and destroyed the airfield and everyone on it. 30 minutes before the aircraft reaches the target, Lieutenant Jepson removes the green safety plugs from the weapon and replaces them with red arming plugs. Little Boy is now live. 3 weather reconnaissance B-29s have been sent ahead of the strike force. The one over Hiroshima, called Straight Flush, and commanded by Major Claude Etherly, reports clear skies over the city. Hiroshima is confirmed as the primary target. At 8:09, Tibbets begins the bomb run from 31,000 feet and hands control of the aircraft to Bombardier Ferriby. Ferriby identifies the distinctive T-shaped Ioi Bridge in his Norden bomb site. The bridge spans the Ota River near the city center. Its unusual shape makes it unmistakable from altitude. A 60-second automatic synchronization tone begins to sound in the crew's headsets. At 8:15, Ferriby releases the weapon. The nose of the Enola Gay rises as the weight of the bomb drops free into the air. Tibbets throws the aircraft into the rehearsed 155-degree diving turn. The Enola Gay is approximately 11.5 miles away when the bomb detonates, 43 seconds after release, at a preset burst height of roughly 1,900 feet above the city. The weapon misses the Ioi Bridge by about 800 feet. It detonates almost directly over the Shima Surgical Clinic. The shockwave hits the aircraft in 2 pulses. The plane shudders. Tibbets later describes a metallic taste in his mouth from the ionization of the air. Tail gunner Karen, looking backward through his observation window, is the first member of the crew to see the result. He photographs the rising mushroom cloud with a handheld camera as it climbs past the aircraft's altitude and above 40,000 feet. Co-pilot Robert Lewis has been keeping a running log of the mission. When he sees what the bomb has done to the city below, he writes a line that will be quoted for the rest of the century. "My God, what have we done?" On the ground, in the city that was catching its morning streetcars 3 seconds earlier, everything that was familiar has ended. Not metaphorically. For the people within a mile of the Shima surgical clinic, the world has ended in the most literal sense the human language can express. The temperature near the hypocenter, the point on the ground directly beneath the detonation, reaches several thousand degrees. Human beings within a few hundred meters are killed so quickly and so completely that many leave nothing behind except shadows. Outlines burned into stone and concrete, where their bodies blocked the thermal flash for a fraction of a second before they were vaporized. The Shima surgical clinic is obliterated. Everyone inside is killed instantly. Doctor Terufumi Sasaki, in his corridor at the Red Cross Hospital 1,650 yards away, is thrown to the floor. His glasses are knocked from his face. His shoes are blown off. He is essentially unhurt. He will become, by most accounts, the only uninjured doctor at the largest hospital in the city. For the next several days he will work without rest, without sleep, surrounded by thousands of burned, bleeding and dying patients, arriving faster than anyone can count them, faster than anyone can help them, faster than the dead can be moved out of the corridors to make room for the next wave. Hatsuyo Nakamura, at her kitchen window 1,350 yards from the blast, is buried under her collapsed house with her 3 children. All 4 survive. She digs herself and the children out. She does not know what has happened. No one does. She will later lose her hair from radiation sickness. Father Kleinsorge is cut by flying glass that embeds itself in his back. He staggers out of the wrecked mission house into a city that no longer looks like a city. He will spend years suffering from the effects of radiation exposure. A 20-year-old engineering student named Sunao Suboi is crossing the Miyuki Bridge on his way to a morning class when the bomb detonates about 1,200 meters away. He is hurled through the air by the blast and knocked unconscious. When he wakes, his skin is peeling off. He is badly burned across much of his body. He is left for dead. He survives. He will spend the rest of his life as one of the most prominent hibakusha activists in Japan, serving as co-chair of a national survivors organization and carrying the visible scars of the bombing on his face and arms, until his death in 2021 at the age of 96. Reverend Tanimoto, standing in his doorway 3,500 yards away, the farthest from the hypocenter of any of the 6 survivors the journalist John Hersey would later make famous, is knocked to the ground, but not seriously injured. He picks himself up and spends the rest of the day wading into the rivers that divide the city, using a small boat to ferry the wounded and the dying to whatever safety he can find. He pulls burned and half-conscious people out of the water. He carries them over his shoulders. Many of them die in his arms or in the bottom of the boat before he can reach the other bank. Toshiko Sasaki, at her desk at the tin works, is crushed when the bookcase beside her topples onto her left leg. She will be trapped for hours beneath debris, unable to move, listening to the sounds of the city burning around her. Her leg will never fully heal. And roughly 260 meters from where the bomb detonated almost directly overhead, a 19-year-old woman named Akiko Takakura survives inside the reinforced concrete headquarters of the Geibi Bank in Kamiya-cho. She suffers more than 100 lacerations from flying glass. Her colleague Kimiko Usami, 1 year younger, will die within a month. Takakura will later recall watching a man whose burned fingertips were lit with blue flame, and she will draw this image from memory for researchers trying to understand what the first seconds of a nuclear detonation look like from the inside. 170 meters from the hypocenter, the closest known survivor, a man named Eizo Nomura, is in the basement of a reinforced concrete building called the Fuel Hall. Everyone else in the building is killed. The concrete and the underground walls save him. He will live until 1982. Across the city, the survivors who can still walk begin moving toward the rivers. Thousands of burned and blinded people stumble through streets that no longer exist, over rubble that is still too hot to touch, toward the water. The 7 branches of the Ota River, which divide Hiroshima into its islands, become corridors of the dying. People wade into the rivers to cool their burns, and many drown because they are too weak to stand against the current. Bodies float downstream toward the harbor. Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, the 42-year-old director of the Hiroshima Communications Hospital, is himself badly injured, but begins treating patients in the ruins of his own hospital. He keeps a diary that will become one of the most important medical documents of the atomic age. In it, he writes that he had to revise his meaning of the word destruction. He writes that devastation may be a better word, but that he knows of no word or words to describe what he saw. If your family was affected by any part of the Pacific War, in any country, on any side, I would be honored to read their story in the comments. Those memories, the small, specific, personal ones, are the actual record of what happened. They deserve to be preserved by the families who carry them. The 6 survivors I have named most often in this account, Dr. Sasaki, Hatsuyo Nakamura, Father Kleinsorge, Reverend Tanimoto, Toshiko Sasaki, and Dr. Fuji, were all real people whose experiences were documented by the journalist John Hersey. In August 1946, a year after the bombing, the New Yorker magazine devoted an entire issue to Hersey's account. It was called simply Hiroshima. It was published as a book later that year and has never gone out of print. It was one of the first times the American public encountered what the bomb had done, not as a strategic event, but as a human one, told through the eyes of people who had been underneath it. The book changed the way a generation thought about the weapon their country had used. It did not settle the argument. It made the argument impossible to avoid. Within hours, a firestorm engulfs roughly 4.5 square miles of the city. Of approximately 90,000 buildings, 62,000 are destroyed. The fire rages from mid-morning into the afternoon and smolders for days. Then comes the black rain, thick, dark, radioactive droplets, water mixed with soot and ash, and the pulverized debris of an entire city fall across Hiroshima and its surroundings for hours. People who are dying of thirst drink it. They do not know what is in it. No one on Earth has ever encountered radioactive fallout before. Over 90% of Hiroshima's doctors are killed or injured. 93% of its nurses are killed or injured. The medical system ceases to exist at the moment of greatest medical catastrophe in the city's history. Communications from Hiroshima to the outside world cease at 8:16 in the morning. The Japanese military high command in Tokyo cannot reach anyone in the city by telephone, telegraph, or radio. They do not know what has happened. A staff officer is dispatched by air to investigate. From nearly 100 miles away, approaching in his aircraft, he can see a massive column of smoke hanging over the place where Hiroshima used to be. The estimated death toll from the bombing, by the end of December 1945, is roughly 140,000 people. This is the figure established by the 1977 study of the International Investigation Team. Other estimates are lower, other estimates are higher. The city of Hiroshima has over the decades recorded over 349,000 names on its memorial register of those who died from the effects of the bomb. The exact number will never be known with certainty, because many of the dead left no records, no remains, and no one alive to report them missing. Among the victims were an estimated 20,000 Koreans who had been brought to Hiroshima as forced laborers. The destruction of Hiroshima does not end the war. 3 days later, the war enters its final and most chaotic phase. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and launches Operation August Storm, the invasion of Manchuria, with more than 1.5 million troops. The offensive shatters Japan's last remaining hope, which had been to use the Soviets as mediators for a negotiated settlement. On August 9th, a second atomic bomb, the plutonium implosion weapon called Fat Man, is dropped on Nagasaki. Nagasaki was the secondary target that day. The primary target, the city of Kokura, was obscured by clouds and smoke from a nearby firebombing raid the day before. The bombardier, Captain Kermit Bayhan, made 3 runs over Kokura and could not see the aiming point. The aircraft, a B-29 named Boxcar and flown by Major Charles Sweeney, was running critically low on fuel. Sweeney diverted south to Nagasaki. Even there, cloud cover forced Bayhan to bomb by radar until a momentary break in the clouds revealed the target. Fat Man detonated over the Urakami district of Nagasaki at 11:02 in the morning with a force equivalent to roughly 21,000 tons of TNT. The estimated death toll at Nagasaki by the end of 1945 was between 60,000 and 80,000 people. After Nagasaki, Truman orders that no further atomic bomb be dropped without his express permission. Until that moment, the military's standing order had authorized additional bombings as soon as weapons became available. The third bomb, another plutonium implosion device, was being prepared. It would have been ready for use around August 19th. In Tokyo, the Supreme War Council meets in emergency session. The 6 men are still deadlocked, 3 against 3, even now, even after 2 atomic bombs, even after the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. War Minister Anami, Army Chief Umezu, and Navy Chief Toyoda still insist on conditions the Allies will never accept. They want Japan to conduct its own war crimes trials. They want no occupation of the home islands. They want voluntary disarmament by Japan's own military. The argument is fierce enough that the future of a nation and the lives of millions hang on the difference between 1 word and 4. The peace faction asks for a single condition: preservation of the emperor. The war faction demands 4. The council rules by unanimity. There is no unanimity. The machinery of Japanese governance has no mechanism for breaking a 3-3 tie on a question of national survival. The deadlock is broken by a man who has almost never intervened in government policy. Emperor Hirohito, who by tradition remains above political decisions, is asked by Prime Minister Suzuki to render his personal judgment. In the underground bomb shelter beneath the Imperial Palace, just before midnight on August 9th, Hirohito speaks. He says the time has come to bear the unbearable. He supports acceptance of the Allied terms with a single condition: the preservation of the imperial institution. Even then, the war almost does not end. On the night of August 14th, after the final decision to surrender has been confirmed, a group of young army officers, led by Major Kenji Hatanaka, launches a coup. Their objective is to seize and destroy the phonograph recording of the Emperor's surrender broadcast before it can be aired to the nation the following day. They murder Lieutenant General Takeshi Mori, the commander of the 1st Imperial Guards Division, and forge orders in his name. They briefly occupy the Imperial Palace grounds. They search room by room for the recording. They cannot find it. A court chamberlain has hidden it in a pile of documents in a room the officers do not think to check. The Eastern District Army refuses to join the coup. By dawn it is over. Hatanaka shoots himself on the palace grounds. War Minister Anami, who had fought to continue the war, but who refused to support the overthrow of the emperor, commits ritual suicide the same morning. On August 15th, 1945, at noon, the people of Japan hear their emperor's voice for the first time in history. The recording is known as the dual voice broadcast. Hirohito does not use the word surrender. He says that the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is indeed incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. He tells his subjects to endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. Japan formally surrenders aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. The Second World War is over. But for the people of Hiroshima, nothing is over. There is a Japanese word for what they are now: hibakusha. It means the bomb-affected people, the exposed ones. They will carry the blast in their bodies for the rest of their lives, in ways that medical science in 1945 does not yet understand. Radiation sickness, leukemia, thyroid cancers, cataracts, keloid scarring that disfigures the skin for decades, illnesses that appear 5, 10, 20 years after the flash, long after the survivors believe themselves recovered. And they will carry something else: a stigma. In post-war Japan, hibakusha are discriminated against in employment and rejected for marriage because of fears that radiation effects are contagious or that their children will be born with deformities. These fears have no confirmed scientific basis, but they are powerful enough to make atomic bomb survivors a marked social class in a country that prizes conformity. Japan does not pass a law providing free medical care for atomic bomb survivors until 1957, 12 years after the weapon was used. Many hibakusha never register for benefits at all, because to register is to be identified, and to be identified is to be shunned. One hibakusha's name has traveled farther than any other. Sadako Sasaki was 2 years old on the morning of August 6, 1945. She was at home, roughly 1,600 meters from the hypocenter, She survived without any apparent injury. She grew up healthy. She was a fast runner, an energetic child, an athlete. In February 1955, at the age of 12, Sadako is diagnosed with leukemia. The doctors call it the bomb disease. She is admitted to the Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital. In her hospital bed, she begins folding paper cranes from medicine wrappers and scraps of whatever paper she can find. There is a Japanese legend that a person who folds 1,000 cranes will be granted a wish. According to her family and to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, Sadako exceeded 1,000. She folded approximately 1,300. On October 25, 1955, Sadako Sasaki dies. She is 12 years old. 3 years later, on May 5, 1958, the Children's Peace Monument is unveiled in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. A statue of Sadako stands at its top, holding a golden crane above her head. The inscription reads, "This is our cry. This is our prayer. Peace in the world." What most people do not know, and what belongs in this investigation because it completes the circle of the entire story, is what was happening on the evening of August 6, 1945, in an English country house called Farm Hall, while Hiroshima was still burning. 10 German nuclear scientists, the men whose country's research had started the entire chain of events 7 years earlier, were being held as prisoners at Farm Hall under a British intelligence operation code named Epsilon. They had been captured in the spring of 1945 as Allied forces overran the German atomic research sites. They were brought to England and given comfortable quarters, exercise privileges, chess sets, and books. What they did not know was that every room in the house, including the bedrooms, was wired for sound. British intelligence officers, many of them German Jewish refugees who had fled the very regime these scientists had served, sat in the basement and transcribed every conversation the Germans had, day and night, for months. On the evening of August 6th, the scientists hear the BBC news report about Hiroshima. Otto Hahn, the man who had discovered nuclear fission in his Berlin laboratory in December 1938, the man without whose work no atomic bomb could have existed, is devastated. He drinks heavily. The others have to watch him through the night. He tells them he is thankful that Germany did not succeed in building the bomb. He has said before that he once wished all uranium could be thrown into the ocean. Werner Heisenberg, the most famous theoretical physicist in the group, initially refuses to believe the report. He questions whether the Americans have actually detonated a real uranium bomb. His first attempt to explain how such a weapon might work reveals a striking gap. He has never correctly calculated the critical mass of uranium-235 needed for a chain reaction. It takes him roughly a week to work through the physics and arrive at an answer that matches what the Allied scientists had calculated years earlier. Horst Korsching, a younger scientist in the group, makes an observation that cuts through the room. He says that the Hiroshima bomb proves the Americans are capable of real cooperation on a tremendous scale. Then he adds that such cooperation would have been impossible in Germany. Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker calls the bombing dreadful. Then he claims that the reason Germany did not build the bomb was that the German physicists chose not to, on moral principle. The British transcribers record this. Historians have treated the claim with deep skepticism ever since. The Farm Hall transcripts were not declassified until 1992. They are among the most extraordinary documents of the war because they capture what powerful and knowledgeable men actually think and say when they believe no one is listening. In the decades since Hiroshima, the question of whether the bomb should have been used has never been settled. It remains one of the longest-running moral debates of the modern era. The arguments on both sides were made by serious people acting on what they believe to be the best available evidence, and neither side has ever fully silenced the other. Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, later recalled telling Secretary Stimson that he opposed using the bomb. He said the Japanese were ready to surrender, and it was not necessary to hit them with that awful thing. He said he hated to see his country be the first to use such a weapon. Some historians have questioned the precision of his later recollection, but Eisenhower repeated this account consistently for the rest of his life. Fleet Admiral William Leahy, Truman's own chief of staff, wrote in his 1950 memoir that in his opinion, The use of this barbarous weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in the war against Japan. He believed the Japanese were already defeated. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted in 1946, with access to Japanese officials and records, concluded that Japan would have surrendered even if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, even if Russia had not entered the war, and even if no invasion had been planned or contemplated. It placed the most likely date of that surrender as prior to November 1, 1945. Against these assessments stands the defense that Secretary Stimson published in February 1947. He called the atomic bomb the least abhorrent choice. He argued it ended the war immediately, prevented the enormous casualties an invasion would have inflicted on both sides, and spared Japan itself from a ground campaign that would have been fought across its own soil, with its own civilians trapped in the middle. Stimson's article, published in Harper's Magazine, was read by millions. It established the framework that most Americans accepted for a generation, the framework that says the bomb, however terrible, was the least terrible option available. Historian Tsuyoshi Hasegawa has argued that it was the Soviet entry into the war on August 8, not the atomic bombs, that was the decisive factor in forcing Japan's surrender, because it destroyed Japan's last diplomatic option. Others have challenged this interpretation, pointing out that the emperor himself explicitly cited the new and most cruel bomb in his surrender broadcast. The debate continues. It will likely never reach resolution, because the question at its center is not purely a question of evidence. It is a question about what a nation is permitted to do to end a war, and that is a question each generation will have to answer for itself. Here is what is not debatable. Every name in this account is real, every date is documented, every figure is drawn from primary sources or established historical records. Where historians disagree on numbers, the disagreement has been noted. Where a quote is attributed, it comes from the speaker's own diary, published memoir, or recorded testimony. There is no composite character in this script. There is no fictionalized scene. The morning was real. The people were real. The streetcars were real. And the distance between the men who made the decisions and the people who bore the consequences was, and remains, the central fact of the story. Dr. Sasaki spent the post-war years treating radiation sickness patients. He never fully recovered his own health. He eventually left the Red Cross hospital and built a clinic for the elderly in his hometown. Hatsuyo Nakamura raised her 3 children through poverty, illness, and the slow indignity of a society that stigmatized the people it should have protected. She worked as a seamstress and then as a laborer. She received official recognition as a hibakusha and medical support only years after the war. Father Kleinsorge never left Japan. He became a Japanese citizen and took the name Makoto Takakura. He served as a parish priest until his health, permanently damaged by radiation, made it impossible. Reverend Tanimoto became an international peace activist. He traveled to the United States repeatedly to raise funds for the treatment of hibakusha and to campaign for nuclear disarmament. In 1955, he appeared on the American television program This Is Your Life, where he was brought face-to-face on live national television with Captain Robert Lewis, the co-pilot of the Enola Gay. Lewis was visibly shaken. Tanimoto stood composed. The 2 men stood a few feet apart on a stage in front of cameras and a studio audience. One had dropped the bomb. The other had spent the rest of that day pulling the dying out of the river beneath it. Neither man had asked for the role history had given him. Toshiko Sasaki spent years in hospitals. She entered a religious order and became a nun, taking the name Sister Dominique. She spent the remainder of her life caring for the elderly and the destitute in a home she ran on the outskirts of the city that had tried to kill her. Eizo Nomura, the closest known survivor, 170 meters from where the bomb went off directly above him, lived quietly for the rest of his life. He died in 1982 at the age of 84. The building that stands nearest to the Happo Center and still partially survives is the ruin of the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall. It was designed by a Czech architect named Jan Letzel and completed in 1915. Because the bomb detonated almost directly above it, the blast came straight down and the reinforced steel dome frame held, while everything around it was destroyed. Everyone inside the building was killed. The ruin stands today as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, known as the Genbaku Dome. It was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in December 1996. Its broken skeleton left open to the sky as a permanent record of what happened on a Monday morning when a city was catching its streetcars and the world changed forever. If this investigation gave you something to think about, hit that subscribe button. There are more of these accounts coming. They are about the moments that broke the world open and remade it, told through the people who were standing in the middle of those moments, with the names, the details, and the truths that do not simplify. Subscribe if you want the next chapter. And remember, the people who lived through August 6, 1945, were not symbols. They were not paragraphs in a policy debate. They had names, they had families, they had morning routines, and they deserved better than to become the first proof of what the atom could do when it was turned against a city that never saw it coming.